Hi, welcome to Rock and Metal Invasion. My name is Steve. Coming up on the show today, we're doing Bon Jovi versus Def Leppard, the first five albums. Very similar to what I did, and also what Tim did with me when we did Survivor versus Night Ranger. So yet again, I've got Tim Durling along to help me. How you going, Tim?
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me on again. And this is going to be even more of a challenge and more difficult to do these than it was Survivor Night Ranger, but that was fun. So I think this one will be fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're both big fans of all these bands, so it's not like is it it's not a given, and so yeah, we like both these bands. So yeah, some albums more than others, and maybe that's going to be a bit of a luck of the draw kind of thing. Whether a favorite album goes up against another favorite album, or yeah, just the way I guess the lineups work out. So we were just discussing before we started that course, Def Leppard started a few years earlier than Bon Jovi. So unlike Survivor Night Ranger, where they almost matched up year for year, it's not quite the same in the early days. But by the time we get to the fifth album, 1992, they're pretty much same in the same timeline. So yeah, do you want to kick us off, Tim? Maybe a bit of history about the bands, and then maybe tell us what you think about the debut Def Leppard and the debut Bon Jovi.
And first of all, this is extremely difficult because both of these bands played a really, really important role in my getting into music and really shaping the kind of music that I would listen to all of my life.
Mm.
Um, that really didn't happen though until a few albums later. So we'll get into that. Obviously, yeah,
Mm.
Def Leppard started a few years before Bon Jovi, but in a lot of ways, they had a lot in common. They were, probably neck and neck for melodic hard rock breaking through on a mass scale where other bands of their genre didn't do. They both have at least one album that's been certified diamond, and yeah, just a lot of similarities. Are both five-piece bands. They were young guys when they started out. So yeah, we'll get into it.
Mm.
So first on the scene, I guess, were Def Leppard, and Def Leppard in the early days were considered part of the new wave of British heavy metal. They sprang
Mm.
up along with a lot of other bands in the UK in the late 70s, and very few of those new wave of British heavy metal bands did very well. Basically, it was Def Leppard and Iron Maiden
Mm.
that made a dent. And unlike Iron Maiden, Def Leppard kind of distanced themselves from that sound early on and said, no, we're just a rock band. But first album fits right into the new wave of British heavy metal in so many ways. So first
Mm.
album, On for the Night, 1980. They signed to a major label fairly early on, Mercury
Mm.
Records, after a debut EP. And this album, of course, I mean, I didn't hear this album when it came out. I was six, but getting
Mm.
it about 8 years later, it's a pretty remarkable debut for
Mm.
five guys. I think their medium age would have been 20. I mean, they were young when they did this album, especially Rick Allen. Rick Allen might have been 16, and
Mm.
it was produced by Tom Allen. And I don't think it was produced on a huge budget, but there are a lot of things to look back and go, wow, this is a pretty together debut. Their
Mm.
harmonies were already intact.
Mm.
The playing is really good. Songwriting wise, you can tell that it's a band, but um, it's a really, really strong debut. It just doesn't have very much in common with anything that came after it. In the case of Def Leppard, it really they went in a different direction. But there's nothing to be ashamed of on this
Mm.
debut. It's good. Rock Brigade and Wasted and Hello America. There are great songs in here. Now, there are songs that link it to the new wave of British heavy metal, like When the Walls Came Tumbling Down, Answer to the Master. Those are a little bit more, dare I say, goth. And that's the only time Def Leppard would ever dip into that. I'm guessing a lot of that probably had to do with Pete Willis, one of their original guitar players. He was more of the metalhead type of guy, but An entertaining debut. Nothing to be ashamed of. I know the guys kind of don't like, they always say, hey, that was just a starting point, but it was a good starting point.
Just as far as the songs that they play, I don't happen to know. I know maybe Rocks Off. Maybe they still play that sometimes, or
I
Wasted?
think they play Wasted
Yeah,
sometimes.
that's
They
about
they
it,
don't
eh?
tend to, yeah, they don't tend to play a lot of songs from this album, but um, yeah, it's definitely very riffy. There's a lot
Mm,
of cool guitar riffs on this album, but yeah, solid album, solid
mm.
debut.
Okay. Bon Jovi.
The Bon Jovi, well, so in a lot of ways, it's everything to do with John Bon Jovi.
Mm,
Um, he started out as a very young gopher
mm,
at the Power Station Studios in New York City, which was, at least my understanding, was at least partially owned by Tony Bon Jovi,
mm,
who was I used to say uncle. I think it's actually more of a distant cousin, but there was a relation there, and he ended up
mm,
working at the studio just doing, somebody needs somebody to run out for coffee, or somebody needs somebody to do this or do that. And in doing so, he got to meet a lot of famous musicians, because the Power Station was one of the major recording studios. So,
mm,
he met
mm,
the Rolling Stones and Queen and Aerosmith, um, and he was, at the same time, he was trying to get a band together. He was trying to get a record deal. He was writing songs, and he one of those songs that he wrote was called Runaway, and someone heard it. I used to know the whole story by heart, but
mm.
somebody heard it, and so ended up
He
producing
gave it.
a
He gave it
really,
to a local radio DJ, who started playing
well,
it.
yeah, but the recording of it, it's not the band. It was like
Oh yeah,
Tim Pierce on
yeah,
guitar. It was Roy Bittan on
yeah.
keyboard. So yeah, it was like a studio recording of it. Yeah, he gave it to, I believe the DJ's name was Scott Shannon at WAPP. It ended up on a regional, like, because they
Yeah.
were part of a radio chain. So by early 1984, Runaway actually became the first top 40 single for Bon Jovi. It hit number
Mm,
39. Very quickly, he needed a band, and he formed the band that we would all know as Bon Jovi, with the exception of the lead guitar player, because the lead guitar player was initially Dave Snake Sabo from Skid Row, who was a childhood friend of John's. Snake didn't last very long in the band. He, of course, was replaced by Richie Sambora,
mm,
and John got signed to Mercury Records as a solo artist. I didn't know that for many years later. He was always signed as a solo artist, but he wanted to be presented as a band. So
mm,
first album comes out early 1984. So John's on the front, the rest of the guys are on the back. Two singles came off of this album. Of course, Runaway, I already talked about. Runaway, to this day, one of my all-time favorite songs. I never get tired of it.
mm,
It doesn't matter how many times I've heard it. The other single
mm,
off of here was She Don't Know Me, which was
mm,
written by Mark Apsek, which is odd because they didn't normally record cover
mm,
songs. They
mm,
co-wrote a lot. They didn't do cover songs, but
mm,
this is a rock solid debut album,
mm,
produced by Lance Quinn and Tony Bon Jovi, more or less Lance Quinn.
mm, mm.
Good sound, Roulette, Breakout. People that don't know this early stuff would probably be surprised at how hard rocking this album is. It's
Yeah,
really, 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 really it's a hard rock album. There's
yeah.
nothing pop about it, really. It's accessible, but it's not.
Mm,
Yeah. I of course, when Slippery When Wet became big, I got all three Bon Jovi albums, and I've
mhm.
played all three of those albums so much that I've got them memorized.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this got some attention when it came out, mostly because of
Mm,
Runaway. It went gold, and then after Slippery When Wet got big, I think both the first two albums went at least double platinum.
mm.
And even though I think these are both really strong debut albums, I got to give the edge to the first Bon Jovi album. That's my pick to get us started.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I think my background with both bands is fairly similar to you. So I'm sort of starting about 86 when Slippery When Wet comes out. Also, then I'm discovering Pyromania, and then I'm sort of going back. And what's interesting with Def Leppard is I remember looking at the back cover and thinking, is that Def Leppard? Because they look so different, having seen them, from this sort of more recent, mid 80s kind of thing. They just look different on the back cover. And also the sound, of course, when I heard the album, I was like, oh, okay, this is doesn't sound like Pyromania, So I'm comparing it to the sound that my initial sort of hearing of the band. But I think this is a really good debut. Uh, it's so different when you go back and listen to something that you didn't hear at the time. So it doesn't quite, I don't think, have the same impact. If I had been growing up in the 70s into music and this came out in 1979 and I went and got it from the shop, I'd be like, oh, this is great stuff, Um, uh, and it still doesn't change the fact I think it is a really solid album. I obviously it's you compare this album to Adrenalize, or compare this album to some of the albums I put out recently. It's yeah, it's that they've obviously evolved and changed their sound quite a bit. But yeah, it is interesting too that they get lumped in with the new wave of British heavy metal, because although this is much heavier than probably one of their heavier albums, right? It's it's still very melodic. I know that Joe Elliott's quite influenced by the glam 70s glam rock kind of scene, and it has elements of that in it. But yeah, really solid album, like you said, produced by they've got some, Tom Alom, who worked with Judas Priest quite a bit. He's the producer. Yeah, so it sounds great. Wasted and Rocks Off are two of my favorite songs on there, but I always thought Hello America was an interesting song title. It's like they're already saying, that's the impression I'm getting. We want to make it outside of out of the UK. We're going to be huge. We're going to be America's going to know our name. That sort of stuff, which eventually did happen. So yeah, solid album, but yeah, I won't say any more. I'll leave it at that. And then Bon Jovi, yeah, like you said, the background there was it's initially just John's band. It actually took him a long time. Like, potentially this Bon Jovi album, could have come out in 1980, because I think he was working in the studio from about 1980 onwards, and he was in bands in the very late 70s. And he was working with Dave Bryan and the keyboard player in early versions. Well, in his early music career, they knew each other since school, sort of thing. So it did take him a little while, and it did take eventually that song Runaway, to get some attention. And then he was away, and he got the deal, signed, like I said, as a solo artist, put a band together. And interesting too, I was just looking at the insert for the debut album. They've got a picture of the band here. Dave Bryan's actually Dave Rushbaum or something like that. So he's got a different name on that.
Yeah, Rushbaum. Brian's his middle name.
Oh, right. Yeah. But yeah, like yourself, went back, got after Slippery got back brought the previous two albums. I didn't even know that those albums existed. When Slippery When Wet came out, I think I probably just thought it was the debut album, right? And you didn't. I didn't even know. I'm pretty sure this never even got released in New Zealand. I certainly hadn't. I never saw when Slippery When Wet was out. I never saw it. It actually had to get reissued and re-released. And then I was like, yeah, great. I had to pick this up. I didn't even know that it existed. So because while it was a bit of a hit in America, I don't think Runaway didn't do anything here in New Zealand. So yeah, going back and listening to this album, and again, I'm comparing it to Slippery When Wet. There's a lot more of the elements of Slippery When Wet there, but it's not a slick production, and songwriting. I don't think had quite got to the level it got with Slippery When Wet, but it's very much a sound of its time. I think. I think that John's obviously you can pick some influences. From the songwriting, but I think Older Nova if you think about Aldo Nova's debut album, and I think it's the same production team, right? And same studio got recorded in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's reminds me of that album quite a bit. But and that's not a bad thing because that's a great album. So yeah, Roulette's one of my favorite Bon Jovi songs. I think that's also probably one of their heavier songs. Really like that one. The song Breakout, really good. If you listen to, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, Tim, but if you listen to Spellbound by Triumph, which came out after this one, sounds very similar to Breakout. There's certain parts of that song.
I never noticed that before, but I hear what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very similar. And initially I thought, oh, Bon Jovi copied Triumph, but actually Triumph, that song came out afterwards. So, but yeah, really, really good album. So I'm going to go with, like yourself, I'm going to go with the debut from Bon Jovi as winner of the first album versus album. So there we go. All right. Can we move on now to High and Dry versus 7,800 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah. Aldo Nova. I mean, Aldo Nova was a huge influence because he was recording that first album there. I think John picked up an awful lot from Aldo. Also, he saw that it was possible that how it could be done, that you could succeed in being a young artist. And Aldo's also credited on the first album with playing some keyboards and singing some background vocals. So, and of course, the two of them would work together again years later.
Almost thought maybe that was a bit of payback. You know, John Bon Jovi, I think, has always been kind
absolutely
of like
it was. Yeah,
looking out for his mates and stuff. You know,
yeah. So yeah, Def Leppard's second album, I think it came out in it was definitely summer 1981, High and Dry, with a Hypnosis album cover that was originally meant for I can't remember. We did a whole episode on Hypnosis. This cover was meant for somebody else and they didn't want it. But anyway,
it's terrible.
It's a funny cover. I think Def Leppard, the idea of this young band, we get to say we have a cover by Hypnosis. So it is funny. I mean, you know, like sometimes they have mustaches, sometimes they don't. Yeah, there's a lot there. But 1981, High and Dry. First time working with Robert John Mutt Lange, not oddly enough on songwriting at this point, but just producing. And a lot of the songs on this album are reminiscent of what Mutt Lange, the work he did with AC/DC. And he certainly helped them become more of a commercial band. I think he had just come off Foreigner 4 when he started working with Def Leppard. And this album sounds almost nothing already like On For The Night. The vocals sound different. The whole backbeat sounds different. The production is way different, but it's a strong album. It does have those AC/DC elements, but there are also elements of melody that AC/DC just didn't do. When you listen to songs like Lady Strange, Mirror Mirror, You Got Me Running, and certainly Bringing on the Heartbreak. You know, they an early version of a power ballad. It sadly, it never really became the hit that it should have. It only hit the US charts, peaking at number 61, but that was in 1984 when High and Dry was reissued and there was a remix of Bring On the Heartbreak. It charted that time. I'm still really confused as to why it didn't do well after Def Leppard were so big, but they weren't touring to support it or anything. They just shot a new video for it. Let It Go is a classic.
Yeah,
another hit and run. I mean, this is I'll say it. This is my second favorite Def Leppard album. I love this album. I've listened to it a ton. And, like in 87, when I got into Bon Jovi, I did the same thing in 88 when I got into Def Leppard. And that summer, it was pretty much all I listened to. Not everything, but I listened to them a lot. And High and Dry, I just kept coming back to. It's pretty remarkable. Again, they're still just a young band, and they came out with this strong album that eventually broke on the strength of like I said, Bringing on the Heartbreak. But the video starting to get some play on this new channel that was on the air in the States called TV. So this album went gold. It was their first one to certify in the States, and it was it would eventually go, I think, 2 or 3 times platinum. Bon Jovi, on the other hand, was 85, I think May of 85, when their second album came out, 1700 Degrees Fahrenheit. Supposedly that's the melting point of rock.
Yeah.
John always said he didn't just want his face on the cover, but that's exactly what they did with the first two albums. They put his face on the cover and the band on the back of the cover. But here's the thing. If you were like me and you were buying cassettes, all you saw was the front. This album is different from the first album. On the whole, it's more melodic and like keyboard driven, and it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's mellower, but it is mellower. You know, songs like Price of Love, Only Lonely, Secret Dreams, the ballad Silent Night, which should have been a hit. They had two charting songs in this album. Minute Out of Love, I think, peaked at 69, and I think Only Lonely hit the top 100. I think they started to do better around the world. My favorite song on this album has always been Hardest Part of the Night. I don't know why that wasn't a hit single. There's a couple of rockers on here. I mean, In and Out of Love is a rocker. King of the Mountain and Tokyo Road are probably the heaviest songs on this album. But overall, it's just they let off the throttle a little bit, which kind of means that they're heading closer towards the sound that they would become known for. And this album did go gold in its initial run. Of course, it eventually went, you know, at least double platinum. I have a real soft spot for all of these albums, and this is going to be the first of many tough decisions. But when it comes right down to it, I have to go with High and Dry. High and Dry is just so good, and but 1700 is close behind.
All right, cool. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so you know, I guess I'm guessing Matt Lang, who's quite a big producer at the time, you know, especially after the success of AC/DC. He must have seen something in these guys, right, and thought these guys are worth producing. Like you said, perhaps not involved quite as much as because he almost ends up being a member of the band, you know, in the next two with all the songwriting, and I think the time that he puts in with the band, but yeah, Let It Go, fantastic song to kick off the album, really good. Again, I'm going to do another song comparison. If you listen to Crocus, Eat the Rich. Crocus, I think they may have heard that song. Sounds quite similar, so check that out. Yeah, another hit and run, High and Dry. The album starts off real strong, and like you said, Bringing on the Heartbreak, that just sounds like one of those hair metal ballads that, you know, that became so huge in the sort of late 80s, mid 80s, but that wasn't happening at the time, so well ahead of its time there. Really great song. Yeah, and just carries on. Very consistent album. I actually got this is actually the Canadian press, so it's the 1984 reissue. I didn't initially buy this. I didn't know about this in '87 or whatever, so I just got the standard version that didn't have Me and My Wine or the Bringing on the Heartbreak remix. But yeah, a few years ago, I was like, oh, I've got to get the version that's got the, well, basically Me and My Wine, which is a great song. I think it was a B-side, wasn't it, to one of the singles?
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's not actually officially on the album, but yeah, you can get it on this version. I think on the Japanese version as well. And they even did a music video for it as well, which is I guess
they did that in '84.
Yeah, when the album got reissued.
Yeah. I've always considered it part of the album. I'm just so used to hearing. It's like Metallica, Kill 'Em All. I still consider Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg part of Kill 'Em All, even though I know they're not. Right. But it's just that version is the one that I listened to when it first became aware of it. Yeah.
I mean, I think it shows the quality of the album that initially Me and My Wine didn't make it because it's such a good song. Yeah, so very consistent. And yeah, you can see that that this is a band. It's still quite heavy, but they're really, the songwriting's got better. Yeah, it's a very good album. Now up against Bon Jovi, 7,800 Degrees Fahrenheit. For me, I think it's a slight decline from the first album. It's still really good. I still really like it, but the consistency isn't quite there, especially I think on the first side. I think In and Out of Love's a great opening track, fantastic. But then the rest of the songs on side one, for me, like Price of Love, Only Lonely, and Silent Night, they're quite mellow songs. I would have liked a few more sort of heavier songs on there. I think that's just getting a bit too light. Oh, King of the Mountain's a good rocker, but it never really resonated with me that much. Now the second side, every song I like. So the second side's a lot better for me. Tokyo Road's a great kickoff. Like you, Tim, Hardest Part of the Night is for me the best song on the album. I think it's just a great mix of heavy, but then also melodic as well. That guitar riff that kicks it off, and then it sort of quietens down. Just it's a really dramatic song, I think. Really awesome. I think they maybe had like 4 singles for this album. Like In and Out of Love, Only Lonely, Silent, maybe Silent Night, and Hardest Part is the Night. I know as far as I've seen 12-inch singles and things like that for those
Yeah,
songs.
In Japan, I think Hardest Part is the Night was a single, but there's they didn't do a video for it like they did the other 3.
Right. Maybe not music videos, yeah. But yeah, and I guess you could argue Always Run to You, To the Fire, Secret Dreams. Some might say kind of filler, but I quite enjoy those songs that finish off side 2. So I don't know that it's always interesting when you hear bands talk about their past albums, retrospectively. Because at the time, it's our best album. It's but then later on, especially when Slippery, when Wet got huge, I think maybe John Bon Jovi has sort of said, maybe it wasn't one of his favorite albums, or there's things he didn't like about it. But maybe because that John's had a lot of time to come up with the debut album. Probably only had a year to sort of formulate this album, get everything right. I don't know. He may have had some of these songs left over, but either way, it is a good album though. Like yourself, went out after Slippery, went out and got the first 2 albums, and was playing those first 3 albums a lot. But I'm going to go with High and Dry just because of the consistency. There's top to bottom, this is the better album for me. So Def Leppard. So it's 1-1 for both of us.
Yeah.
Romania. Now this is going to be a tough one, I reckon. Battle of the big guns here. Slippery When Wet versus Pyromania.
Definitely, this is where it really heats up. Just one thing about Price of Love on 7800. When I was talking about Aldo Nova, when I listen to Price of Love now, that sounds like a song that could have been on Aldo's first or second album. I hear that it sounds like something he would write. So I really hear that influence.
Yeah.
So Pyromania. I mean, it's hard. What more can you say about Pyromania? January 1983, and this changed everything. And as we're filming this, there's a huge 40th anniversary version of it coming up. I don't think it'll include this per se, but this was a game-changing album for hard rock in general. 3 top 40 singles at a time when most rock bands didn't have more than 1 or 2 singles off of an album. Photograph was obviously the most successful. It went to number 12, but Rock of Ages and Foolin' were also quite well known. We're fully into the video age now, so they got a lot of video play. Now Mutt Lange is fully in on the songwriting, and one big change with this album, of course, Pete Willis is out and Phil Collin is in, although Pete Willis, his rhythm guitar tracks are all over this album, and he co-writes most of the songs on this album. So I'm sure if he owns his publishing, he's probably done quite well for himself. Pete Willis is like a recluse. You never hear from him. He's just kind of disappeared. But yeah, it definitely, I mean, to me, Pyromania and High and Dry are similar sonically. It's just that High and Dry is like maybe a louder, heavier version of Pyromania, but there's still heavy songs on Pyromania. I mean, Rock Till You Drop, Stage Fright, Die Hard the Hunter, Billy's Got a Gun. It's, yes, they were embracing the pop hooks, and definitely it was paying off for them. But it's still a pretty heavy album. And it went to number 2. It was one of those albums that, like Van Halen's 1984, it just could not dethrone Michael Jackson's Thriller. It went on to sell, 15 million copies. It has been certified diamond, and it's Pyromania. It speaks for itself. It changed everything for, not just for Def Leppard, for hard rock in general, with bands realizing, there's possible to still keep that that hard edge guitar, be an aggressive sounding band, have those rock vocals, those hard rock vocals, and have big radio hits. So hugely influential and hugely popular. Now, yeah, you know, I talk about this in my Unspooled book in the introduction, because this album, this changed everything for me. When I was 12 years old, when I was just about turning 12 when this album came out, and people that are, you know, older will scoff, and people that are younger won't get it, because when they think of Bon Jovi, unfortunately, they think of the band that Bon Jovi is now, which really just a pop band or a country band or just your generic mainstream adult contemporary band that's been around forever. But for me, hearing You Give Love a Bad Name on Top 40 radio, on the radio in general, in 1986 was a game changer. That was my Beatles on Ed Sullivan moment. It changed everything. It changed everything for me, because the stuff that I was listening to, I liked Huey Lewis and the News and Duran Duran, and I liked a little bit of guitar, but I wouldn't have said that I was a heavy metal fan. So when this song came on, it had all of the elements that I associated with harder rock bands. It had the loud guitars, it had the loud drums, it had the shouted vocals, but what it also had was the fact that I heard the song once and I've never been able to get it out of my head since. It was so catchy and melodic. And I, you know, also at this point, I only had a handful of actual albums, Steve. Like, mostly I would get blank cassette tapes and record songs I liked off the radio. This album changed that. This band changed that. When I first got the cassette of Slippery When Wet, so the first thing before that happened, I remember You Give Love a Bad Name. Okay, it's all over the airwaves. September, October, November, December 86. It's a #1 song. The video gets played. The band looked cool. Everybody liked it. Like, most, you know, it was huge. And then I remember, if I'm remembering this correctly, it was New Year's Eve. I was listening to the radio in my bedroom, because I'm 12. What am I going to do on New Year's Eve? I'm listening to the radio, and for the first time I hear the next single from this album, which of course was Living on a Prayer. And then it was like, okay, with these two songs, this is the coolest band that's ever existed. That was it. It was the first time I had a favorite band. This 2 songs. Then I think I saw the video to Runaway. And that's when, you know, between that, getting the Slippery When Wet cassette, and when I opened it up, it said also available, and it listed those first 2 albums. And I said, well, I got to get those too. I didn't know. Most of us thought that this was a debut album, especially if you just got the cassette, because the cassette only said Bon Jovi on it. It only said Slippery When Wet on the spine. And I've listened to this album so many times, I could play it in my head. To me, it's weird. You know, I listened to all of these albums leading up to doing this during the week. And no matter how many times I've heard You Give Love a Bad Name, Living on a Prayer, and Wanted Dead or Alive, when you hear them in context of the album, I don't get sick of them, because I expect to hear You Give Love a Bad Name come after Let It Rock. I expect to hear Social Disease come after Living on a Prayer. I'm just so used to the running order on this album. I don't know why they didn't release Without Love as a single. I don't know why they didn't release I Die For You as a single. Those both could have been hits. But I also don't know why they didn't put Edge of a Broken Heart on this album. But that's another story. This absolutely changed things for me, in terms of, it wasn't enough for me to record songs off the radio. I needed to get the actual albums. I needed to hear all the songs that they did. I started reading the rock magazines at this time, learning about bands like this. There's absolutely no way this isn't going to be the top one. Pyromania was fantastic, but it missed me the first time around. I vaguely remember the photograph once, and I remember seeing the album cover, but I was you know, target one, ground zero for this album. I was the target audience all the way, and it got me hook, line, and sinker. So no question, Slippery When Wet.
So I'm exactly the same. So I'm living through the moment, right? It's happening right now in real time, sort of thing. Like, they're releasing the album, and they're blowing up everywhere. music videos are on TV. So that makes a big difference. And like you, Tim, it's sort of like um, opened me up to other bands as well. So I'm checking out a lot of other bands that also had that same similar sort of image after hearing this album. So anyway, I've got to talk about Def Leppard first. And this is an amazing album. This is, again, talk about consistency. There's not a bad track on this whole album. Like, everything is really good or great. Not surprised that Pyromania was a massive hit. It's just got all the elements of a great hard rock song. But yeah, the production's amazing. Def Leppard, I don't know, some people maybe don't like it, but the background vocals, that's just like, well, so produced so well and harmonized. And obviously there's a lot of production work goes into it, but it's one of the elements of Def Leppard and their signature sound that sets them apart from other bands, I think. Sounds so good. So yeah, it's yeah, like I say, really, it's yeah. I mean, I do have some favorite songs, but yeah, Too Late for Love. I do like that one. I love the way that one sort of starts off slow and then kicks in. Yeah, Falling, that's also a great one. But yeah, and ends with Billy's Got a Gun, which I think is a really good song. Yeah, just fantastic. If it was up against in almost any other album, it would win. But it's up against one of my favorite albums of all time. So yeah, Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That this is not the band that they were at this time. Now they're not anything like this. Although they're still going to play a lot of these songs when they're in concert. So but they have to basically, right? Living on a Prayer, especially Wanted Dead or Alive, You Give Love a Bad Name. I mean, You Give Love a Bad Name is a relatively heavy song, but it's got all the elements to make it a hit as well. So, of course, Desmond Child, he comes into the band for this, so songwriting, and he's a big addition, right? He's very important because he then goes on to work with the band lots more times after that. And there's no doubt about it. He's a hit maker, right? He knows how to write hit songs, how to just add those hooks, that really just, I think, makes that difference. There's nothing, the first two Bon Jovi albums, great, but then you add Desmond Child just coming in and just adding his little magic touch to it. And of course, Bruce Fairbairn, production wise, it's just a little bit better, I think. Yeah, although I love this album, I think there are some songs on here that they could have done without, like Social Disease. Like you said, Edge of a Broken Heart. That would have been a good song to replace that with, maybe, or Borderline. I actually really like Borderline as well. So a couple of songs that didn't even make the album that would have made this album even better. But it's still a very good album. They actually recorded a lot of songs. I've actually got a CD. I don't have it here with me, but it's like of all the demos that they recorded. Because then I think supposedly the story is they go to this pizza joint and they get people to while they're eating pizza listen to the album, and they help select the songs that they chose. I don't know how true exactly that is, but
the pizza parlor jury, they always talked about that.
Yeah. So
John said he didn't even want Living on a Prayer on the album. He said,
yeah.
I couldn't pick a single if my life depended on it.
Maybe, yeah. Anyway, they had
it's a fun story anyway.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is a fun story. Yeah. And they did have a lot of songs. So, yeah, and that's the thing. Bon Jovi do have a lot of songs. They always put a lot of effort into. They record a lot of songs, I think, for each album, because there's always lots of B-sides and demos and unreleased stuff. But yeah, so I'm like you, Tim. I'm going to give it to Slippery When Wet. So there we go, 2-1.
Yeah, you reminded me of something too about Slippery When Wet. The Bob Rock, or the Bruce Fairbairn, Bob Rock team of producing and engineering. To me, that's how music should sound. I love that big sound, and that was another factor in it. Yeah. So, okay, well, this is where it gets extremely difficult, but let's see what I can do. I'm done with the 8 tracks now, by the way.
Yeah, no more. I love the 8 tracks.
Yeah. Believe it or not, the first Bon Jovi album exists on 8-track, and it's one of the most sought after you can imagine, right? But yeah, it looks like this with the blue band around it, the Columbia House version. But yeah, it actually there actually is a Bon Jovi track.
Mm.
So Bon Jovi, mania really, and like you said, I started just Whitesnake. Not too long after that, came out with the 1987 album. Was new to me. I didn't know they were an older band. I got
Yeah.
into them. I got into Europe, Cinderella. Yeah, just looking for other bands that played that kind of melodic rock. Nothing ever came, nothing ever threatened to dethrone Bon Jovi as my favorite band until I got into Def
Mm.
Leppard. But this album, of course, we all know it was a long time in the making, and the stories are legendary. The trials they went through to record this album. Rick Allen losing his arm being
Mm.
the biggest one. They tried doing it without Mutt Lange, did not work. Joe Elliott got sick, got mumps. It was just delay after delay after delay. Finally comes out August 1987, and that was an eternity in the 80s. When you were used to bands putting out an album at least every 2 years, just keep that name, keep that recognition going.
Mm.
Yeah, Pyromania was a big album, but that was 4 years ago. People
Mm.
forget. And like I said, to me, not just Pyromania, but like bands like Quiet Riot and Twisted Sister, bands that were huge. They passed me by.
Mm.
And it wasn't so easy before the internet to go back and listen to stuff. And why would you want to? That's quote unquote old, right?
Yeah.
So Def Leppard puts out Hysteria. It's much different than Pyromania in terms of it's not. There's nothing on this album I would call heavy. Even Die Hard the Hunter.
Mm.
This is the heaviest songs on here would still be heavy for hard rock.
Mm.
And I'm thinking of stuff like Gods of War and Women and really not much else.
Mm.
This is I'm still going to say this is an extremely futuristic sounding album to me. This sounds like nothing else that had ever come out before it. And they were all the limits of technology to make this album happen, to incorporate Rick's electronic drums, to do weird things with the background vocals that had never been done before. All pre-Pro Tools, all like instant, presets. They were doing a lot of things by hand. And it took a while for this album to catch on. And we all know that it wasn't until Pour Some Sugar on Me came out as a single that it started to really take off in the States. I think it was stalled at like 3 million, which, believe it or not, I think Phil Collins has said they figured out that between studio time and flights, and they had to sell 5 million to break even to pay back the label. That would never happen now. It'd be like, you're gone, cut their losses and they're gone. And I did not like when this album first came out. Women I kind of thought, well, that's kind of neat, but I wasn't sure. The next thing that came out in North America was Animal, and I hated that song. I love it now, but I hated it when it came out. I don't know why. Again, I think it was different. There was something different about it. There was a pop element that had never been there.
Yeah.
Hysteria, the song, I kind of grudgingly liked. It was so catchy and melodic. But Pour Some Sugar on Me it did what You Give Love a Bad Name did for me 2 years previous, hooked me right in. And it was one of those things where I swore up and down I didn't like this band. And then I had to say, well, I guess I do like this band. And I bought the album, and I can still remember putting the headphones on. It was like taking a trip. It was like all of the different production elements. And this is another album that I've got memorized start to finish. I know every ad lib on here, every vocal part. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it sold even more copies than Pyromania. It ended up with 6 hit singles, 4 top 10 singles, a #1 song, huge album. And I love the artwork and all the singles all had B-sides on them. I just bought right into the whole thing. So yeah, Def Leppard, became, Def Leppard and Bon Jovi were neck and neck. So
Mm,
this was all summer 88 when I was going through this. Well, what happened in fall of 1988, again, like that, we're living through this. This
mm,
is happening in
mm,
real time. Um, I knew Bon Jovi were obviously working on a new album, seemed like
mm,
forever. And it's the first time that I've ever waited for an album to come out
mm.
as a fan.
Yeah.
And I remember probably 2 weeks prior, I remember hearing Bad Medicine on the radio. Of course, I liked it instantly. And then I bought the album, and just the idea that there were new songs to listen to was just mind blowing. So New Jersey comes out, and um, it's my favorite Bon Jovi album. It still
Mm,
is. I still think this album holds up today. I've got the deluxe version that came out in
yeah.
2014, I think. It's got a lot of unreleased stuff. Some of it you can hear where they use parts of songs for other songs. There's like demo versions of songs that you do know. They really did pick the best songs for the album, although one of my favorites that didn't make the album is Love is War, which ended up being
Yeah.
the B-side of Living in Sin. But when you listen to it, it sounds an awful lot like You Give Love a Bad Name. It's like part two. I still like it, but I can
Mm,
see why maybe not. That might be, but to me, I mean, this album had 5 hit singles. So Lay Your Hands on Me. It was so in order of the singles. It was Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby,
mm,
I'll Be There for You, Lay Your Hands on Me, and Living in Sin. So that took them the full year in the charts. They're
mm,
on tour all the time. But some of my favorite songs in this album are Wild as the Wind and Stick to Your Guns, which could have been singles but weren't. But they're just
mm.
really good albums. Blood on Blood is fantastic. Yeah, and it just, I never ever thought I'd like an album more than I like Slippery When Wet, but this proved that they didn't, they could do it one more time. And it's so, Steve, this is so excruciatingly tough because these are two
Yeah.
of my all-time favorite albums. But I have called Hysteria my favorite album of all time.
Right.
So I gotta give it to Hysteria, although this is knocking at its door. I mean,
Mm,
it's by the smallest of degrees, because these are both full on 10 out of 10 classic albums to me. So this is the one that I was dreading the most, because I hate to pick one over the other because I love them both, but
mm.
I gotta go with Hysteria.
Okay. All right. Great. Cool. So that's 2-2 now. So let's making it. It's going to be we're going down to the fifth album to decide it for you. All right. So yeah. So first up, yeah, Hysteria. I mean, here in New Zealand, I think Animal was the first single. So it's even got on the hypes here. Includes the
Yeah,
single
I think it
Animal.
was in most of the world.
Yeah. And it wasn't the big hit. I saw it on, they were playing the music video here on TV, and it got a bit of radio play, but it was Pour Some Sugar on Me that really blew things up for them. So they might have been a bit nervous at first, eh? Like, oh gee, this is not quite as big as what we were hoping it was going to be. But yeah, eventually, and then of course they end up with lots of singles being released. I know this is sometimes the album that makes people get off the Def Leppard train. They stop at Pyromania, and I know Martin Popoff is not a fan. Um,
Yeah,
and I think you've discussed that with him.
legendarily.
Yeah. 0 out of 10, I think, in his book. But
Yeah.
it's it is different. It's super produced, right? And you've got to kind of accept that. I don't mind it. I don't mind that because, yeah, it's just the songwriting's so good. It's still hard rock enough for me to like enjoy it. It hasn't got too pop. And again, you got those great background vocals. Even more now, it's so clean and commercial and just high production. I mean, state of the art production. Like no one was putting out an album that sounded like this at this time. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, they had a lot of time to work on it. But yeah, I mean, so I wasn't a big fan of Animal, but yeah, Pour Some Sugar on Me, I did really like. as far as the album tracks are concerned, and I actually like Woman, I like Rocket. Um, Armageddon, which was another single. I think that's a great song. That's a little bit more like the Pyromania type sound. I think that one. And then side two's a little bit more, less of the singles, but still some good songs. Don't Shoot Shotgun, I really like. I like the way that starts off. With the sort of the sort of singing the chorus and so forth. So, yeah, really strong album. I never liked the title track, Hysteria. I'm not a big fan of that. Or Love and Affection's just getting a little bit too poppy for me. But Love Bites was actually another massive song for them, and I actually quite like that song. I still don't mind hearing that one. I think that's a pretty good song. Yep. So that's Hysteria. Yeah, I like that album. Do I like it as much as Pyromania? No, I don't. But I do like the album. I do enjoy the album. So now New Jersey. So yes, I'm like you. I'm like, this is probably the first album I'm anticipating with a lot of excitement. And I think I just happened to have the TV on, and all of a sudden the music video for Bad Medicine comes up. I guess this was before internet, and I didn't even know that there was a new Bon Jovi single or album coming out. So I'm like, whoa, and it was quite an interesting video because it's like supposedly it's fan made footage, and they're all just out there with their, and they got Sam Kinison out there and revving up the crowd and all that kind of stuff. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great song. I love the little keyboard parts of that song. I think what separated Bon Jovi from some of the other hair metal bands is that, you could hear the keyboards, and they embrace the keyboards in their songs, and I like that. So yeah, that was a good first single, and then Born to Be My Baby, I think, was another great song. And I got to be honest with you, Tim, I'm a little bit different to you. This was a little bit disappointing to me. I don't think Lay Your Hands on Me as an opening song is anywhere near as good as Let It Rock. It's okay, but it just didn't do it for me. I guess when I'm comparing it to Slippery When Wet, I'm kind of going, okay, and so the ballad on here, Living in Sin, doesn't match up to Wanted Dead or Alive for me. Blood on Blood's getting a little bit too Bruce Springsteen for me. Homebound Train, I've never liked that song. Well, side two on Slippery started off with Raise Your Hands, which is such a great song. And then it kind of gets a bit weird because, like, Wild as the Wind, Ride Cowboy Ride, Stick to Your Guns, I'll Be There for You. They're all like quite mellow songs. They're not particularly heavy. So it really dies for me in that middle period there. And I didn't like Homebound Train. So unfortunately, it picks up. I quite like 99 in the Shade and Love for Sale. I don't even why I don't. For me, that's a throwaway track, and that I understand it's at the end of the album. It's kind of but like I said, there were songs like Love Is War, which I think is a great song. I would like that on the album. So this is actually a disappointing album for me. I think it's probably in some ways maybe a more mature album, more sophisticated perhaps, and maybe that's I don't know, but yeah, for me I preferred Slippery When Wet so much more. I would like a bit more of that sort of sound on this album, but so yeah, I'm actually going to go with Hysteria.
I think we've matched so far, though, as far as our picks, have we not?
Yeah, well, we have, because even though I'm dismissive of New Jersey a little bit, you went with Hysteria as well. So
I still went with Hysteria.
Yeah. So we're still it's two all, and yeah, we've actually matched. Yeah, we have. So now we're coming up with the fifth and final.
Yeah, I mean, so it's pretty crazy. I mean, so because now we're living these albums in real time, I can such vividly remember everything that was happening. And of course, we're reaching the end of the 80s and things are changing. I mean, the world is changing. Berlin Wall comes down, Soviet Union and all of that. So what were these bands doing in that time? Well, so Bon Jovi, you might as well say they broke up. It was never formally announced. It was only ever just kind of rumored, but they toured I think they toured New Jersey from October 88 to February 90. Like they were, you
Mm.
know, just pounding the road, right? And I think by as the story goes in the behind the music, when the plane got to wherever it got, 5 different people went in 5 different directions, and they never even said goodbye to each other. And of course, 1990, the big news is that John, I mean, his release is his first solo album, but it doubled as the soundtrack of Young Guns 2.
Mm.
This is where he starts to work with Aldo Nova again.
Yeah, yeah.
And Blaze of Glory, which they came to him and said they wanted to use Wanted Dead or Alive in the movie, and he said no, the lyrics are all wrong. So he said, let me come up with something. And Blaze of Glory is similar to Wanted Dead or Alive, but it does fit more of that cowboy Old West theme instead of being about a band on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, it's a #1 song.
Yeah.
I think it won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It was huge.
Yeah.
And the song that people never talk about anymore is Miracle. That got all the way to #12. That video featured a pre-stardom Matt LeBlanc from Friends in the video. And Jeff Beck, the late Jeff Beck, played on the album. Little Richard played on a track. Elton John did a track. It was star-studded. And I actually think it's a pretty good album. And I mean, I tried to imagine when it came out, because I was like, wait, well, what does this mean? Does this mean, one of my favorite bands is broken? So I bought it, and I mean, it doesn't sound that different than what a follow-up to New Jersey might have sounded like in 1990. It just didn't have the same, I don't know what you'd call it, gravitas, because I've always been band first, individual members second. Now, having said that, I'm an enormous fan and supporter of Richie Sambora's Stranger in This Town, which he put out in 1991. I think that is a criminally overlooked album. I think that album should have been huge. You got the lead guitar player, and he was well known by name. People knew who Richie Sambora was. Yeah, the dude with the cowboy hat that sang on Wanted Dead or Alive. I think one of the problems, they came up with a good first single, but I still think they shouldn't have called the song Ballad of Youth, because it's too confusing and it doesn't get in people's heads. They should have just called the song Young Hearts, because that's what the chorus is, right? But that should have been a hit single. Church of Desire could have been a hit. The title song could have been a hit. Father Time should have been an enormous hit power ballad. I love that album, and it was different than Bon Jovi. It was a little bit bluesier, and it was just different, but I really liked it. Def Leppard, toured Hysteria for well over a year. It got so big, and then they just disappeared into the studio, and they're such perfectionists that they were trying to do it again. And I think to have that 1-2 punch of Pyromania and Hysteria, no band had ever quite done that, except arguably Bon Jovi in terms of sales. But New Jersey did not outsell Slippery When Wet. Hysteria outsold Pyromania, and that very rarely does that happen. And unfortunately, for me, I still remember that when I saw on the television that Steve Clark died. It was the first time that somebody in a band that I liked, that I was into at the time, not a band I got into later, that somebody died in the 70s, died. And it was real. It was weird. It was a weird feeling, because it was like, you feel like these people because you listen to their music so much, and it's like, nobody's immortal, but it never occurs to you. He died at the age of 30. It was just so tragic, and yet it was still another year before the new album came out. And so now we're into like March of 1992, and everything had changed so much. By now, people are starting, and I'm in my senior year of high school, so this was a huge, this big difference. People are starting to talk about this band Nirvana. People are starting to talk about Pearl Jam. I'm hearing this stuff, and it's doing nothing for me, and it never did. I'm still holding the course,
Yeah.
And then I hear Def Leppard has a new song. Then I hear they have a new song, and it's Let's Get Rocked. And I want to be careful how I say this, because I do like the song.
Yeah.
But I do remember thinking at the time, wow, that is silly.
Mm.
That's a silly song. It's just shy of novelty.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Especially
Is
like you
this
say,
their
at the
base?
time,
Yeah.
at the time,
It's,
things that the music landscape is changing. Things that we're getting less silly, right? We're trying
yeah.
to sort of get a little bit more. You know, song titles like "Let's Get Rocked" sound like something that would have come out in '82, not '92. You know, it's just
Yeah.
yeah.
Eh,
Anyway,
I understand it was always meant to be tongue in cheek. They've always viewed the
yeah.
music as escapism. You know, they've dealt with so much tragedy. I understand that, but the world doesn't understand that.
Mm.
And people that didn't like Def Leppard anyway were
Mm.
ready to pound and say, "This is ridiculous. This is
Mm.
stupid."
Mm.
And meanwhile, I'm a huge fan, and I'm like, well, I remember getting the cassette single, because cassette singles, you know, were a thing, and it had Only After Dark, Nick
Oh
Ronson
yeah.
song and B-side. And I remember liking that more than I liked Let's Get Rocked.
Mm. Mm.
Let's Get Rocked, it got a ton of airplay. It went to number 12. And of
Mm.
course, Adrenalize comes out.
Mm.
This is a reissue. I didn't have it on vinyl at the time, but
Mm.
and I've never been able to quite shake the feeling that it's incomplete, because if you think about it, it's really only 9 new songs,
Mm.
because Tear It Down was a remake
Mm.
of the B-side of Women. I like the original version better. It's not as polished.
Yeah, so do
So
I.
really, there's just 9 songs.
Mm.
So I've already heard Let's Get Rocked a ton at this point.
Mm.
So really only 8 songs to listen to. Like Hysteria had 12 songs. I don't understand why they
Mm.
couldn't have, because you know they've got a backlog of songs. They could have easily stuck
Yeah.
2 more songs on there.
Yeah.
And before I go more into that, I still think that in fall of '89, when they put out that home video, Live in the Round in Your Face from the Hysteria tour, they should have put out an audio only version of that. They should have released that as a live album. They could
Mm.
have put that as a live album and put like Tear It Down and I Want to Be Your Hero and I don't know, Ring of Fire, like,
Mm.
and because right around the time that home video came out, they did Tear It Down at the MTV Awards. And I remember people at school saying, Def Leppard have a new song. Well,
Mm.
I knew it wasn't a new song, but that would have been the time to capitalize on that. They could have had a minor top. That could have entered the top 40. Not been a huge hit,
Mm.
but something like "I Want to Be Your Hero" at that time, they were so big that could have been a huge hit for them,
Mm.
and they could have sold 3 million copies. And I think the reason they didn't do it is because bands typically didn't release live albums at that time.
Mm.
But I still think that would have bought them some more time in
Mm.
between albums, and no one would expect a live album to sell as much as Hysteria. That's just my personal feeling on it.
Mm.
So, but what do I like about Adrenalize? I actually like quite a bit about Adrenalize. My favorite song on Adrenalize has always been Stand Up, Kick Love into Motion. To me, that would have fit right in on side 2 of Hysteria. That's quintessential Def Leppard. Heaven is catchy. Again, Make Love Like a Man was the second single. It's kind of silly.
Mm.
It's kind of tongue in cheek. Phil Collins raps in it. Tonight has never done anything for me. And Def Leppard ballads are usually, yeah, man, that's good. They've got that hook. Tonight has always just been completely flat for me. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't take me anywhere.
Mm.
White Lightning is a cool song. It's a cool tribute to Steve Clark. I do like that song.
Mm.
That wouldn't have been a single.
Yeah, 7 minutes
Personal
long.
Property. Yeah, Personal Property is super catchy, but really, you're referring to your significant other as property? Okay, I know they weren't thinking that, but and have you ever needed someone so bad? To me, when you got a song with just a long ass title like that, it's just that that song's never done much for me either. It was a pretty sizable hit for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I Want to Touch You is like, that could have, that to me, that sounds like a B-side. That sounds like a song that, oh, that's not bad. Keep writing. It's okay.
Mm.
And then, of course, you have Tear It Down, which is an existing song.
Mm.
At the end of the day, you have an album that it's still, I'll give them credit. And I was so supportive of these bands, still sold 3 million copies.
Mm.
So, in the midst of a time when, I mean, these guys were ridiculed. If you've ever seen them perform at the MTV Awards that year, people are flipping them off, and it just, it became very, very tough to be a fan of these bands.
Mm,
I, I mean, I liked what I liked, right? But that's when
mm,
I ended up getting into a lot of older bands that
mm.
year, like Queen and Zeppelin and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons that the stuff wasn't just hitting me anymore. And then the other bands that I was into were dying, like
Yeah.
Cinderella and
Yeah.
Winger, and So yeah, Adrenalize, good album, not a great album, my opinion. So now fall of '92, surprisingly, because I fully expected, there to be an announcement that Bon Jovi had disbanded, but
Mm,
they got back together. And I think October, I saw the video for Keep the Faith. Now, a lot of people did not get on board with this. A lot of longtime fans, New Jersey was the last thing that they
mm,
liked.
mm,
I stayed on board, and
mm-hmm.
I'm of the opinion that this was the last good Bon Jovi album. Some people really like These Days. I've never been able to get into it. It's always sounded like one long ballad to me. I'll
Mm,
have to revisit it. People whose opinions I trust say, no, 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 These Days is the last good Bon Jovi album. I agree. After that, it's no good. But and it's interesting because whenever I talk about this band, I have such mixed feelings because they're so important to me. But it's really all about the first 5 albums, even though I've liked a song or two here and
mm.
there,
Sure.
what they've
Yeah.
done. Here's the difference between Def Leppard and Bon Jovi. Def Leppard have never put out anything as far as studio albums go that I haven't bought. There's a ton of Bon Jovi stuff that I just won't buy. I
Mm,
haven't bought a new Bon Jovi album since uh, I got Have a Nice Day. I got The Circle, and I got that Burning Bridges because it was cheap. It was like $7.99 at the front counter when I was paying for something else. I thought, oh, why not? It's awful. So I haven't
yeah.
bothered with so much of what they've done. Def Leppard, I've hung
Yeah.
in there, and they've been more, as far as I'm concerned, they've done better. So, but as far as this album goes, I really like this album, and I think that I think that they were very, very successful at changing.
Mm,
Now, they changed a bit too much for my liking in years to come,
mm,
but I think in 1992 they changed just enough
mm,
that they still were a major, major band out there. Um, Keep the Faith had a lot of R&B in it, but I thought that it had a really cool drum beat, and John's vocals were still good. I think his vocals might have hit a peak around this time, actually.
mm,
I Believe is a cool opener. Always liked that one. In These Arms, I think, is classic Bon Jovi, the way that I think that Stand Up is classic Def Leppard. That wouldn't have sounded out of place on most of the other albums. They did end up doing way too many ballads. I still think Bed of Roses is one of the best ones. It's pretty heartfelt. To me, I Want You is a little fillerish. We could have done without that one. One of the heaviest Bon Jovi songs ever, If I Was Your Mother. That's kind of this twisted, possessive subject to it, but musically it rocks.
mm,
Dry County. I wish they would do more stuff like Dry County, because that was like an experimental epic track. It's got some heavy parts, great guitar solo from Richie. Fear is a heavy song. I'll Sleep When I'm Dead is a fun rocker that, it's fun. The way that Raise Your Hands is fun. Yeah, I'm giving the nod for fifth album. I'm giving the nod to Bon Jovi by a pretty wide margin, because unlike Def Leppard, Bon Jovi took some chances on this album, and I think that they paid off. Whereas Def Leppard took no chances
mm.
whatsoever with Adrenaline, and so I think it needs. And I just think it's a better batch of songs. So yeah, that's that is my opinion there. I think Keep the Faith is better than Adrenalize.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Yeah. Actually, I might start off with Bon Jovi. So, yeah. So Keep the Faith. I think maybe part of the reason for the title, obviously, it's a song as well, but is because there was all this sort of talk about perhaps Bon Jovi splitting up. It's like they're saying, keep the faith, we're going to stay together. You got the hands all out there, they're all together. Even Alec John Such is not even playing on the album. Probably he gets his
Yeah.
yeah, he still gets his hand in there. But yeah, I mean, they like exactly what you said, Tim. They had changed their sound. This sounds quite different to Slip People and Wet. It sounds more like what you would expect Bon Jovi to sound like in 1992. Uh, for me, it's a great comeback. I was disappointed with New Jersey, but I love the title song, "Keep the Faith." Saw the music video. I thought, oh yeah, this is fantastic, awesome song. Um, it's less of a this album's less of a singles kind of album, right? Like there's not. I mean, yeah, you've got your ballads on here, and I don't like the fact that there's two ballads in a row. So you got "In These Arms" and "Bed of Roses." I never liked that. I think if you're going to do a ballad, then go to a rocker after that. But anyway, they do make up for it by then after "Bed of Roses." If I Was Your Mother, which is like you said, one of the heaviest songs. I love that song. That was one of my sort of favorites. The opening track, "I Believe," I think that's going back to another, really great way to kick off the album. I really like the lyrics in this album. I think they're really positive and inspiring. Which Bon Jovi often did do those kind of lyrics, or they're kind of really meaningful. Like Dry County. That's got quite a serious sort of a message, and an epic song. And like you say, they almost never really did another song like that again that I can think of anyway. Such a good song. One of my favorite Bon Jovi songs. Woman I Love, Fear, good rockers. They're kind of fun. There's a song that didn't, I think it's on the CD version, perhaps. Say a Prayer. I really like that song.
I have a deluxe CD of it
Yeah.
that's got that as the 13th track.
Yeah.
It was also the B side of "In These Arms," I think.
Yeah. That's a great song. I really like that one. So, quite a few good songs on there. So I actually prefer this over New Jersey. And I'm like, yeah, back on the Bon Jovi train. Not that I left it, but I was a bit disappointed with New Jersey. But yeah, really loving it. It's an interesting album. This one, I think this one probably a little bit sales wise a bit disappointing in the States, but worldwide, I think it did better. So
yeah, worldwide, I think it's one of their biggest selling albums. In Europe and in other places, yeah. In the States, it's again like Def Leppard in the time period, it sold very well considering. I think it went double platinum, maybe more. But around the world, it was totally, and all of a sudden, all these markets opened up for them around the world.
Yeah, and a lot of singles. Yeah, "I Believe" was a single. "Sleep When I'm Dead," I think might have been as well. "In These Arms," "Bed of Roses." So yeah, quite a few singles. And "I Believe" as well. Actually, that was a single. So yeah, quite a few singles. So Def Leppard, Adrenalized. I don't even have the album. I'm sorry. I've had it in the past, but there's just been no reason for me to keep it. "Tear It Down" is the only song I like on there, and I already had that on a 7-inch single. It's on the B side. It's a great song. I think it's interesting that they didn't. So Mutt Lange, I don't think has anything to do with the album, or maybe
no. Yeah, he's executive producer, and which means that I think he co-wrote everything except for "Tear It Down." Okay. And the album was produced by the band and Mike Shipley, who was one of Mutt's engineers. So it might as well have been produced by Mutt. It sounds like it.
It does. It's still got a similar production sound. The songs just aren't there, and lyrically they've regressed badly. I mean, they weren't lyrical geniuses, but geez, I mean, I just even in '92, I couldn't take it. "Making Love Like a Man" or whatever it's called. I just no, and then the first two singles, weren't great. And I've consistently gone back to it, thinking, well, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's some good tracks on there that I've just missed, but I haven't found them. I'm sorry. It's quite a come down for me from Hysteria. So they did really well, though. I mean, that was surprising. They did surprisingly well, considering it's 1992, and I think the quality of the album. I don't think there's hits on there, but they did have hits. I guess I don't even have the albums. So I can't look at it. But what's the ballad? That would from Adrenalize, Tim.
Have you ever needed someone so bad?
Yeah. I can imagine that being a hit. Yeah. So, um, yeah, but they had some B sides as well. Probably from the Hysteria sessions that are so much better. Ring of Fire, that's a great song. If they were running out of ideas, I would, like you sort of said, it would have been good if they just put that on the album instead. But anyway, of course, they saved those up and put that out as retroactive. But
Yeah, which I listened to that way more than I ever
yeah,
listened to with
yeah.
Reprise.
So do I. So do I. No, I've got retroactive. I like it. There's some really good songs on there. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I guess it's just personal taste, but I just think the songs they chose, because obviously they had some other songs they could have put on there. Yeah, would have been better. But yeah, and just sort of because you touched on your sort of the future albums and your feelings on them. Yeah, I've sort of stuck with Def Leppard straight through. I mean, their latest album, not so much, but their 2015 album I thought was actually pretty good. This is Def Leppard.
Me too.
Yeah,
Me
I
too.
thought that was really quite a good album. Enjoy that one.
Yeah.
Bon Jovi though, I stopped after Have a Nice Day. I thought that was okay album. There's some good songs on there. I actually really like Bounce. Yeah, Crush not so much. And these days, Hey God's a killer opening song, one of the heaviest.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the heaviest Bon Jovi songs. And then, like you say, the rest of the album just seems like one big ballad. So, yeah. Anyway, so obviously though, I'm giving it to Keep the Faith. So we're pretty much on the same page. Yeah, Tim. Interesting.
It's really interesting how we came around in different ways, but yeah. But yeah, like just really quick with Bon Jovi. I mean, so I got These Days when it came out, and I remember. So the best of Crossroad comes out in '94.
Oh yeah,
and
that was a hit too.
They had Always, which was a huge hit. And I'm like, it's another ballad. But I gave them some slack because it's like, well, it's a best of. That's your best bet to, And the other song on it, Someday I'll Be Saturday Night. I thought that was okay. Then they come out with These Days. And the very first single is a ballad. This Ain't a Love Song. It's like, man. So that was the first time that I didn't get a Bon Jovi album instantly as soon as it came out. I bought Crossroads as soon as it came out. I think I got These Days months later because it showed up in my Columbia house. It was like I guess I'll get it. And I have to be honest, I really, really liked It's My Life. I thought that was a classic Bon Jovi song in its writing. It just had that modern production, which I'm not big on, but I get it. It worked for them. It brought them back.
Yeah.
The Crush album on a whole, not that good.
No.
Very disappointing. I agree with you. Bounce isn't bad. Bounce is not bad. And the thing about Bounce is that it doesn't have that one song that got overplayed and you get sick of it.
Yeah.
I did get pretty sick of Have a Nice Day, the song, even though it's not a bad song. I really did not like that. That's when this started to go the whole country thing, like Who Says You Can't Go Home.
Yeah, well, they had a hit, didn't they? And then they're a bit like that. They have a hit with something, they go, right, next album, we're just going to make that song. Yeah.
Then they did an entire album, Lost Highway, which I've never bought. That was sort of country influenced. I always say the country thing swallowed them whole. The Circle has a couple of songs that are okay. It's just that with Bon Jovi, I want more than okay. The album they put out after that, what was it called? What About Now? They had a really bland title. Never heard a song off it. Don't care to. Like I said, Burning Bridges, that sucked. I'd throw it out, but I can't bear to throw a CD out.
Yeah, I was hoping that was going to be good because I thought it was like leftover songs. I thought, well, maybe sometimes their leftover stuff is better.
They did something worse than putting out bad songs. They put out boring music. It's just boring, ineffective. There was so much hype over This House Is Not For Sale. I listened to a bit of it. It's the same boring old junk. Same thing with 2020. Same thing with the new song they just put out. And this is a band, like I said, means so much to me that I hate what they've become. Def Leppard, on the other hand. So, okay, they put Retroactive out. It's B-sides, but it's a good collection of songs. Then they put out their best of Vault. Slang. I don't hate Slang.
No, I like it.
I like it better now than I did when it first came out. it sounds like they were trying something.
Mm.
Euphoria, I think Promises is one of the best songs they ever did. And I remember when I heard that, I'm like, okay, my band, at least one of my bands is back.
Mm.
The whole album isn't that good, but it's pretty
No.
good. It was a pretty good return to form. Did not like X at all.
No.
The covers album, whatever, it's a covers album. Sparkle Lounge, awful. Didn't like any of the new songs on Mirrorball. Really liked the self-titled album. I thought that Diamond Star Halos had a few decent songs on it. It wasn't great all the way through, but it was all right. And I don't even talk about that symphonic thing because that was just a waste of time. But there's no new songs in that anyway. My point is I bought every one of those. I stayed on board. I've kept the faith when it comes to Leppard. And I've seen them. I saw Bon Jovi twice, both times on the Keep the Faith tour, which is the only time I've ever done that, seen the band twice on the same tour. I've seen Def Leppard 3 times. The last time I saw them was 4 years ago, and they were fantastic. So they've still got it, and they're still capable of putting out good music. But it's hard to compare with those childhood memories when you were just so into it. But yeah, this was great going over this period in the career of both of these bands.
Yeah, no, it's been fun, and you can tell we're big fans, and I guess we should be thankful they're still going, and I reckon they'll still keep going for another 10 years probably.
Oh yeah,
so I see Richie Sambora has just put out a new single. Have you heard that at all?
No, I haven't. I'm not saying I won't, but
it's actually okay.
After a while,
you might like it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Quite
now
good.
that you've said that, I will check it out.
Quite good. Not great, but quite good. So it's interesting. It got released on the same day that the new Bon Jovi documentary, Thank You, Good Night, got released. So
yeah.
All right, thanks, Tim. So there we go. So that's our album battle: Bon Jovi versus Def Leppard. First 5 albums. It's a close one. Bon Jovi ended up taking it out because we both actually had pretty much the same picks, I think, the whole way through.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Even though we had different opinions on the album. So 3-2 to Bon Jovi. Thanks, Tim, for joining me. Make sure you check out Tim's channel, fantastic channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. And no doubt Tim will come back hopefully at some other time, or maybe do something similar again. But yeah, go check out his channel. Thanks for coming, Tim, and thanks for watching. We'll catch you later.